I'm curious what the process, how you kind of landed on having the puppets as the kind of way to do it versus doing traditional animation or live action, and how did you kind of get here?
So one of the very beginnings of the genesis of the show was that Mike Judge had an idea that he wanted to do an animated interview show, and he thought it might be fun to set it at a public radio station. And then he brought in Zach to help develop it, and Zach brought me on, who I'm sort of Zach's regular writing partner. And the thing that got us really excited about stop motion is that it felt like stop motion puppets, which are like maybe these 12-inch, very fragile things. We felt a lot of connection to that's they did in a lot of ways seem to reflect sort of me and Zach's sort of tribe of progressive postal people. There's like a tweeness to them and a delicacy to them, and this idea that they're being controlled by outside forces or influenced at least. We're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense for us and sort of how we see public radio.
Well, I've seen the whole first season, and it's you're certainly not doing rip from the headlines kind of stories, but there's still things that kind of touch upon what we're dealing with today. What was the balance like of trying to figure out what you wanted to say with these various episodes while making it not so tied to a specific time in our culture?
Yeah, that was important because stop motion takes a really long time to do. So we were really worried as the process was going on that it would feel dated by the time it was released. Because everything that came into the episodes are things that Zach and I and the writers had thought a lot about. And so the beginning part of the writing period was just us talking about in what ways we relate to those characters. And I think one of the things that Zach and I find sort of funny and absurd about ourselves is how we have these sort of progressive ideals and we want to be a good person, but all the ways we sort of fall short of that. And how easy I think it is to sometimes confuse projecting yourself as a good person versus being a good person. And again, like in all the ways that we regularly fail with that, it's like, oh, that's like I don't know if there's a lot of comedy about that. And when we get really frustrated, what with ourselves or sort of the members of our sort of chosen community, writing the show felt very cathartic to like, well, now we can put it into something constructive. It won't be just us being like, oh, we're horrible. Why are we such hypocrites? It's like, well, maybe we could make something funny with it.
You have an extremely eclectic group of human, for lack of a better word, live action people who are being interviewed. What was the process like in finding who you wanted to get, and what was the process like in shaping what you wanted those interviews to be like?
So I would say the number one thing was that we wanted them to feel like guests that might actually be on an NPR show that like you might hear on Fresh Air. And the other thing was that we wanted to talk to people that we were generally interested in, that people that we sort of think are fascinating and that are all different from each other. So as we were booking these guests, which we're so grateful that they were willing to come along to a show they'd never seen before, and where they're like, what is this? It's stop motion and I won't see the person I'm talking to. How is that going to work? But they were so game for it. And yeah, Roxane Gay could not be more different than Mike Tyson or Tegan and Sarah or Ken Burns. And the other thing that we're really excited about is that all of these people get interviewed all the time, but we're really hoping that because the format in which they'd be interviewed would be so unusual, where they're talking to an image of a puppet that's being played by a character, it would give them the chance to show aspects of themselves they don't normally get to see and show in interviews.
What amount of guidance did you have to do? Because a couple of the interviews are relevant to what the characters are going through. So what was the kind of guidance you gave with the
We
actors
gave,
about what you wanted to do?
yeah, very little. So when they would first pop up on the Zoom screen, I would talk to them before Zach would talk to them in character. They'd never see Zach before the interview. And all I would tell them is treat it like it's a real NPR interview. And none of the other parts would be scripted. With rare exceptions, like we knew that Tegan and Sarah were Lauren's dream guests, and we had the idea that one of them would get sick and cancel the interview. So how we did that one is they did probably an hour's worth of real interview, and then at the very end, I was like, "Would you mind pretending to get sick at the end of this so we can use it for the show?" And they're like, "Sure, no problem," and we did it. But everything else was just natural. And a lot of times, what would happen is that things would happen in the interviews that would actually cause us to go back and rewrite parts of the episode. Mike Tyson, for example, said these really profound things about loss that we were like, oh, now that he said that, let's rewrite the ending of this episode. Let's have that, what Mike Tyson says, be the reason Lauren is able to sort of get over this crisis he's in. And so they sort of both influence each other. Sometimes, like Zach would bring up something specific that's part of the wider story in The Office, and sometimes something one of the guests would say would influence the outside story.